So the Western media is talking all about how Russia has defaulted on its debt. Ooh, bad, bad, bad. They didn't pay their debts. It's like not paying your credit card bill or your mortgage, more importantly, I mean, oh my God, they defaulted. The first time they have defaulted since 1918. Even in the depths of the Soviet collapse of the 90s, the Russians were paying their debts, but now they didn't. Yeah, because it means the sanctions are working. Oh, goodness. Okay, to those of you who don't know, I'm going to give you a little background onto what it means for Russia to default, okay? And then I'll get to why this is actually absolutely meaningless to Russia. It doesn't affect them at all, and it only hurts the West. And let me explain. First, what are bonds? What's sovereign debt? Well, basically a government issues bonds, these little promissory notes, these IOUs. It sells them for cash and gets the cash and uses the cash to, build bridges or roads or whatever. Okay? Now, the Russians sell bonds out in the open market, sovereign bonds. And you would ask, right, why is it that a government that is supposed to be solvent would sell debt? I mean, why do they go into debt if they have all this money coming in? Well, for the same reason that you use your credit card sometimes to buy stuff. The same reason that you get into a mortgage loan. Because sometimes you don't have all of the available cash to do some particular project. You will over time. And so you take out a loan. So it's no big deal. Now, the Russians, of course, issued a whole bunch of Russian bonds, sovereign debt, and they issued it to a bunch of different people. And of course, they issued these bonds in dollars or euros, and they sold them in the European markets and the American markets, and the international markets, generally speaking, of course. Now, those people bought those bonds for euros or dollars and gave those euros or dollars to the Russians, with the expectation that over time the Russians would pay them back, pay them the interest coupon, and pay them the principal. And so because of the sanctions, one of the sanctions was that it basically stripped the Russians of their own bank accounts. Now, you got to keep in mind that all of the sanctions packages, right? It cut off Russian banks and the Russian central bank from Europe and the United States. So as a practical matter, the Russians can no longer buy European or American products, okay? I mean, they could, but it would be very, very convoluted and a difficult process and have to go through China or some other Asian or South Asian intermediary. And so, the Russians now cannot buy anything made in Europe, cannot buy anything made in the United States. And the dollars that they had on deposit in American banks and European banks to pay for European and American goods or services, well, they don't have access to those accounts anymore. And so the bonds came due, that the Russians had to make an interest payment, and they couldn't because they don't have access to the money that they have in their JP Morgan accounts in New York, because they have accounts there. And these accounts are publicly known. And how much money is in the accounts is more or less known as well. And so the Russians, since they can't access the cash there, they can't pay the bondholders. Okay? It's like this. You owe the bank a mortgage payment, but the bank, prevents you from accessing the money in your account with that bank to pay the mortgage loan. And so because they prevent you from paying, you can't pay. And so they say, oh, you defaulted on your mortgage. And you're like, dude, I want to pay. I'm saying to everybody that I want to pay. I've got the money in the account with you, but you're not letting me pay the loan. So whose fault is it? Mine or yours? That's basically what's going on. And so why is this, stupid? Okay, it's stupid because, see, all the sophisticated investors around the world, in South Asia, in Asia, in Africa, Latin America, they all know that Russia is good for its debts, that it will issue bonds and it'll pay for them. And the thing is, the more sophisticated and the more intelligent investors, they know that sovereign debt, Russian sovereign debt, is rock solid, and it pays much higher because the ratings agencies for years now, because of the sanctions of 2014, downgraded those bonds. And so those bonds pay a higher yield just because of the downgrade. Because of the downgrade, a lot of institutional investors in the West have not been able to buy those Russian sovereign bonds. And so there's less demand. Less demand, lower prices. Lower prices means higher yield. A sophisticated investor, an investor who sees past the bullshit, he's realized that Russian debt, Russian sovereign debt, is just aces, man. You make a lot of money off of them, right? And so the sophisticated investor, he knows the story that I've told you. And he understands that it's not that the Russians don't want to pay, they're not being allowed to pay. And so what is an investor going to do who has access to Russian bonds? He's going to keep on buying them because the Russians are good for them. But the investors in Europe or the United States who bought these bonds, they're the ones who got screwed because to them, they held these Russian bonds in the United States and in Europe. And the Russians didn't pay them for the reasons I've explained. And so all of a sudden, they're not getting the income that they expected from their debt. They're not getting the payment from the debt that they hold. And they're pissed. And they're hurting. It's a problem for them. But they can't go to Russia to sue them and get the money because even if they were able to sue the Russian government for this debt, because of the sanctions, they can't access the money that's locked in these accounts. And the Russians, of course, are telling the investors, hey, we want to pay you, man, but the Americans and Europeans, the financial authorities there are not letting us pay. It's not our fault. And an investor will say, of course, it's not the Russians' fault. It's this fucking government in Washington and this fucking idiots in Frankfurt, who are blocking these payments. And so they're going to sue the US government and they're going to sue the European Commission or perhaps the European Central Bank. It doesn't really matter. And you see, the investors in America, the investors in Europe, they're the ones who are going to suffer. And who are these investors? A lot of them are pension funds. Because I said before that a lot of institutional investors can't get into Russian sovereign debt because of the ratings thing, right? But others can, others have, because they understand how lucrative these bonds actually are. And they're the ones who are getting screwed, okay? It's only hurting Americans and Europeans. It's not hurting the Russians because investors in Latin America, Africa, South Asia, East Asia, they all know that the Russians are good for them. They all know that these bonds are just lickety-yummity. They're just so good. And so, of course, they're going to buy them, and they're never going to worry about them because their own governments are not stupid enough to block Russians from paying for their debts. That's what's going on. And so nominally, yeah, sure, the Russians defaulted on their debt, nominally. But in reality, no. And so nobody cares. And the Russians are saying right now, they're saying, not my problem. They're just telling the people in the West who bought their bonds, said, it's not us. It's not our problem. It's your problem with your government. And the Russians are right. It's so damn funny. See, these sanctions, the sanctions only work with medium, smallish to small economies. They don't work with a big economy. They don't work with a crucial hinge economy like the Russian economy. And now the Americans and the Europeans, they're getting ass blasted because of this. And the Russians, they're perfectly fine. See? They're sailing on, and they're making more money than ever before. And all of those investors parking their money in Russian debt, they haven't missed a beat. This has done absolutely nothing to Russia and really hurt the Western economies. Understand what's going on.